Hello, my name is Jason J. Rock Houston, and this is Metal. And my metal partner in crime, as usual, is Joe Lawson. And tonight, Joe, is a very special episode. We enjoy doing this so much, and people enjoy This Is Metal so much. We're doing an extra episode for the month of March. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Randy Rhoads, obviously, because I was just kind of thinking the other day, and I came to realize that it's been 39 years since Randy's died. Coming up March 19th. The actual day he died was March 19th, 1982. So we're going to be talking all about Randy and his legacy today. So why don't we start off, Joe, with you telling us how big of a Randy Rhoads fan are you and kind of how you got into his music?
Well, yeah, I'm definitely a fan of Randy Rhoads. I mean, I could only imagine what the world of metal music and music in general would be like if he had lived long enough to put out more albums and to do more than what he did. But the fact that he's left such a huge impression, such a huge footprint, in so many musicians, obviously, especially guitarists, but with only 2 albums, I mean, speaks volumes. I mean, I don't know of too many other guitar players in history that can say that they had a lasting impression like Randy Rhoads had. And,
I'm with you.
I was a huge fan of him. The guy was incredible.
I'm awesome with you there. I mean, another guy that kind of comes to mind, but is Jimi Hendrix in the sense that, he died relatively young too. I mean, he was, when you think about Jimi Hendrix, I mean, Hendrix came way before Randy, but just bringing Hendrix up for a little bit because he died really young too, of a drug overdose, obviously. But I bring him up because obviously Jimmy had a little more than 2 albums to his credit, but he also is another guy that did not have a lot of, he just released a couple albums, more than 2 albums, but it wasn't like a whole, like 20 albums or anything. And much like with Randy Rhoads, like you're saying, he still, both these guys left a huge legacy. I mean, even today, Hendrix is remembered for, playing the guitar with his, with his teeth and that. But getting back to Randy, like you said, it's kind of interesting because he did, when people think of Randy, of course, we know he was in Quiet Riot, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but, before he ever joined Ozzy, but it's those 2 Ozzy albums that everybody knows him for. And like you said, it's hard to kind of have a favorite, but I'd say of the 2, maybe I'd have to say Blizzard of Oz, only because that was kind of, the first time anybody ever heard of Randy Rhoads, and also it's the first album where we're hearing Ozzy for the first time outside of Black Sabbath, and Blizzard of Oz, everybody's waiting to hear what Ozzy's going to be doing, and it was very different than what he was doing with Black Sabbath, and Randy Rhoads was a huge part of Ozzy's, having the success he did as a solo artist.
Shaping that sound was a big part of Randy Rhoads being involved with Ozzy.
Yeah.
I don't think Blizzard of Oz would have been a bad album.
Oh no.
With someone else, but I don't think it would have been what it was or even close without Randy Rhoads.
I mean, it would have been a very different sound. And see, here's the thing. Like people fail to realize, even going back, when you talk about Ozzy, going back to Black Sabbath, they share kind of a songwriting credit, but from what I've heard the guys talk about over years, it was really Tony and Geezer that wrote the lyrics and everything, especially Geezer. He was into science fiction, and he wrote the bulk of the lyrics. Ozzy has maybe developed more over years as a songwriter, but even when he first went solo, one thing Ozzy's been great at, he always surrounds himself with guys who are great songwriters, guys who are, great musicians. I understand very early on, Randy kind of had to sit down and kind of teach Ozzy how to write a song. So that's another interesting take of the influence Randy had on Ozzy's solo sound,
Yeah. I mean, Randy came from a highly educated background with his mom running a music school and him playing guitar and piano and taking lessons and learning theory. I mean, a friend of mine put it really, really eloquently, really great. It's like going in the library. Remember years ago when you
yeah.
the card catalog?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And you'd use the card catalog to find the book because there's this huge room full of books. You'd be in there for days trying to find the book you want. Well, music theory is like the card catalog. You go right to what you want to do and not have to search around and roam around and try and figure it out for hours on end.
Oh yeah, very interesting.
So,
yeah, and Randy too. I learned a lot of stuff I never knew about him today. Just reading up on for Randy Rhoads Wikipedia, and I knew he was great friends. Probably his best friend in life with this guy Kelly Garney, who was the original bass player in Quiet Riot. I'm reading this, and I come to find out that actually Randy and Kelly have known each other since junior high. They met in junior high, and they were like the best of friends. And part of the reason they were so close is not just were they, kind of in the same kind of, rock and roll music, but Kelly Garney was quoted as saying that, him and Randy were best friends because they were probably the most different from everybody that went to this. They met in junior high, and it was in Burbank, California. And he said, we kind of had a rocker look. We looked so different from everybody else. We weren't jocks. We weren't dopers. We just looked different. And, the other kids didn't kind of want to hang with us. And so we had kind of that connection right away. And so, like you said, Randy came from a musical family. His mother was also classically trained. They owned this school in North Hollywood. But the family still owns to this day. It's called Masonia. And I think because his mother, just for the last couple of years, she lived to be like 99 or 100, very, very old, but she was loved by like all these like heavy metal musicians and stuff, and people would go visit the school and stuff over the years. But the thing is, his older brother Kelly, who's also a musician, is still running the school. I think his sister as well is running the school these days. But I bring this up because these two guys meet in junior high, and these two guys meeting has had such a major effect, not just on their careers but on music history in general, because Kelly Garney and Randy, they decide, okay, they want to play music. And from what I'm reading is Randy eventually gets to a point where he wants to teach Kelly how to play the bass. And then at this point, Randy wasn't even playing lead guitar. I guess he was playing he's classically trained. Like you said, he started out on piano. And then Kelly goes on to say that, at this point, when they're in junior high, Randy starts to take guitar lessons. He starts to learn lead guitar. And at one point, they formed their first band together, which is called The Whore. And these two guys are, they stay close, they stay friends up until the point that they formed this band called Little Woman that eventually morphs into Quiet Riot.
Mm-hmm.
And just think, the twist and turns life takes. You meet somebody along the way in junior high, and you guys go on to form, this band Quiet Riot, which would become a major player on the LA metal scene, in the 80s. And this is even before the Ozzy Osbourne thing. And of course, Quiet Riot wasn't that well known then. They were just kind of starting out, but they eventually got to the point where they were playing all these big LA like clubs like the Whiskey and the Roxy and I think the Starwood it was called. And so even before Ozzy, Randy was making some serious noise. Yeah, absolutely. He's like you said, the guy's had an effect on so many people. So many other musicians and so many other bands, and everybody from star people to no-name people, and everybody in between. He really was a living legend, absolutely, in every aspect of the word. And I think it's interesting to point out, in one of his bands, they did Mississippi Queen by Mountain. We just had a conversation about that. Yeah, I was reading up on that, and we're going to get into that later too, Joe, because I went on there, and I guess you read some of the same stuff, just little tidbits. I've never even heard about this guy, and it's kind of interesting to learn this stuff all these years later. And interesting thing about Randy is, I guess, not too many people really had issues with the guy. Everybody you talk to, they say what a cool guy Randy was, what a sweet, kid he was, and never really heard one person say, a sour note about the guy. And for somebody, first of all, to be so young and not kind of have a cocky attitude, and you got all this talent stuff. This is very early on when we're talking about Quiet Riot in his career, but to not have even one person really have ever said a negative thing about this guy, I think that speaks volumes about the character he had.
Right. Absolutely.
And you know, the other interesting thing is, you know, again, Quiet Riot at that point was a very different sounding band, you know, than what they would go on to, for example, become with the Metal Health album. That was the first, like, Quiet Riot broke out in a big way. Randy had at this point gone on to Ozzy, and they had that big hit with Metal Health and Bang Your Head. And it was a much different band, meaning because they did have much more of a metal. When Randy was still with Quiet Riot, they kind of had more of a glam image, kind of a glammy pop sound to what they were doing. They weren't as kind of full blown on metal as what they would eventually become, and that's why if you ever get a chance to hear those albums he did with Quiet Riot, they're classic albums. Sadly, though, they've never been released in the U.S. I guess there's some legal issues where the record company still owns the rights to those things, but you can go on YouTube and you can check the stuff out. It's pretty cool sounding. It sounds like your typical kind of classic rock, 70s classic rock from that time. They did put out a compilation a couple years, you know, probably about 15, 20 years ago called, you know, Quiet Riot, the Randy Rhoads years, and they have some pretty cool. I mean, one that really stood out to me was one called "Last Call for Rock and Roll," and then actually predating Metal Health. You can also hear on the Randy Rhoads year compilation. There's an earlier version of "Slick Black Cadillac."
Yeah, not dismissing what he did with Quiet Riot, but to me, the imprint left to me with Randy Rhoads was definitely what he did with Ozzy Osbourne.
Oh, definitely.
But I think it's interesting to point out too that he cites Alice Cooper, going to an Alice Cooper concert in 1971.
Wow, Joe,
being a defining point in his career and in his life.
You know, Joe,
and really inspired him to become what he ended up becoming. With all these bands and really pursuing music, it really pushed him in that direction. You know,
Joe, it's funny that you and me, I guess, because I kind of pointed you, hey, go check out the Wikipedia, Joe, and we picked up on like the same. This is all the stuff I wrote down, and that was a key thing when I read that. You know, him and his brother going to an Alice Cooper concert in Long Beach, California, and I even wrote down. You know, the date here. I believe it was July 11th, 1971, and that's kind of interesting for me because I was born July 4th, 1971. So that point that this concert is taking, I'm just days old, you know, but it has anything to do with me. Just kind of, that's kind of my viewpoint. I grabbed notice of that. But the interesting thing too about that is, I've heard for years, probably like you, Joe, that, you know, Randy's classically trained and he was much more into like classical music supposedly than he was into metal. But it's kind of interesting that, that like you said, it was going to an Alice Cooper concert that made the guy want to learn how to play lead guitar. I specifically read the same thing that you did, and he was telling his brother, I can do what those guys are doing. I want to get up on the stage. I can play like that. I can have a look like that. And like you said, you know, after that he'd go on to, you know, form Quiet Riot, and Ozzy would follow. But I've always heard about how he was so into classical music. I never heard that he was like even an Alice Cooper fan, or it said also he was influenced by another one of his early guitar influences was Mick Ronson, who was the guitar player from Mott the Hoople, which was a huge glam band from England, like in the early 70s. I mean, you've probably heard some of their songs, which is you know, All the Way from Memphis, that great white song, Once Bitten Twice Shy. Another one of my favorites that you've probably heard is from Mott the Hoople, that is The Golden Age of Rock and Roll. But I've never heard that Randy was into this stuff, and when I was reading this, that's the first thing I picked up on.
Wow.
Just kind of
cool.
Funny that you and me would go the same place. You know, that's what we picked up on. And I was also reading that he was also influenced by bands like the Beatles and David Bowie. And he even played.
Well, sure, yeah. You look at the time frame. You know, I mean, that's pretty typical or normal for that time frame back then. Musicians were definitely influenced by older bands like that.
Oh yeah, and you know, it's kind of interesting too because So once he does go on to Ozzy, a lot of people that had never, Quiet Riot was just kind of starting to have a big hit with that Mental Health album. By the time that came out, Randy had already been, he'd already died. And if you listen to the Mental Health album, there's a track on there called Thunderbird. That's a track that Quiet Riot lead singer Kevin DuBrow wrote about Randy. When he had heard Randy had died, and Kevin at the time, he was kind of he had a lot of people that didn't like him, but him and Randy were always close, and like a lot of people, when he heard Randy died, it really affected him, and so he wrote that song about Randy, and then from that point on, whenever Quiet Riot would play the song live, they would dedicate it to Randy. And the cool thing, a lot of times when a guy dies, people will probably write a song about him maybe down the line, but it's usually years later. I mean, this is only, the song came out like 1 year after Randy died, which, wow, that just blows your mind,
Wow, yeah, that is cool. Another interesting connection here, we did a show a while back on Frankie Banali.
Yeah.
And Frankie Banali played drums in that lineup with Randy Rhoads and Ozzy Osbourne and Strum. Yeah. So that's an interesting connection there too, with the whole Quiet Riot thing,
Yeah, and actually I'd heard at some point, I don't know what the time frame was, but that through playing in Quiet Riot, which, like you said, he got the gig originally, Frankie Banali, from what I know, in 1980. And even though Frankie Banali doesn't play on a Quiet Riot album until 1983, he had been touring with the band like in the early, at that point when they were still touring, the LA circuit.
Right.
And him and Randy, like you said, they played in Quiet Riot up until the point he left to join, Ozzy. And so it's kind of interesting, just as Randy's leaving, Quiet Riot kind of changes their sound. Kevin DuBrow, he's like the only original member left from the original band. He kind of takes the reins of the band, and they become like a heavier band. But they never forgot about their founding father, so to speak, Randy Rhoads.
Absolutely. How could you, right?
Yeah. And it almost had to kind of make the Quiet Riot guys, especially like Kevin DuBrow, kind of stop and think, wow, why when we had this guy weren't people flocking to the shows like they are now with Ozzy? But again, that was kind of the precursor. And so even though Randy was in Quiet Riot, in those early days, and he kind of made it with Ozzy, they've always got that connection with the guy,
Right.
And before we move on to the Ozzy era, last thing I will say interesting about Quiet Riot, we were mentioning this guy, Kelly Garney, who's the original bass player for Quiet Riot, and he's a guy that Randy knew since junior high, and they did all this stuff and grew up together. Now, at one point, Kelly Garney gets, fired by Randy because, like we said, Randy's kind of a cool guy. He gets along with everybody, but I guess he was one of these guys who didn't like a lot of drama. And at some rehearsal, Kevin DuBrow and Kelly Garney, they get like in some kind of a squabble. And Kelly Garney gets drunk, and he supposedly, and this is a long time, story that's gone around. But Kelly Garney actually had a gun. He had made a plot to, he drunkenly said this. He didn't really mean, but he was so drunk that he had a gun on him. He pulled a gun and shot it in the air, and he actually threatened that he was going to have he was going to kill Kevin DuBrow. Again, long known rock and roll story through the years that has been told, but. Randy and Kelly's like, oh yeah, I didn't mean it, man. I was just drunk. And he said, yeah, but that's a crazy thing to do, to kind of shoot a gun up at somebody and then say you're going to kill them. No, even though you're my best bud, we can't have that.
Yeah, that's a little radical, I would say.
And again, I think that speaks volumes about Randy's character, because he was friends with Kevin and everybody in the band, but at the same, he had known Kelly Garney the longest, and it's kind of interesting that, hey, even though you're my best bud, no, we can't have that. He was one of the guys, that I guess he was raised, I guess, about doing the right thing.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the beginning of the Randy Rhoads story. And now at this point, we get into the Ozzy Osbourne era, which is interesting because, like you said, Dana Strum, who a lot of people know he plays these days like in Slaughter and Vince Neil. He at one point used to play with Vinnie Vincent. But before anybody really knew who Dana Strum was, he was this guy that would produce like demos and stuff for these up-and-coming bands. And he was kind of this cat on the LA music scene that he was always kind of helping bands out. And this is before Dana was ever had much of a musical career of his own. He was trying to help he was trying to work and help people on the scene at the same time, making a name for himself. And one of the first connections I guess he had was kind of hooking up with Ozzy, and I guess Ozzy and Sharon asked him, "Hey, Dana, do you know anybody that we're looking for a guitar player?" And he knew this guy Randy that played in this band Quiet Riot. It was actually based on Dana's recommendation that they agreed to audition him, and then they liked what Randy was doing so much that they flew him with the rest of the band to England, and they recorded the first Blizzard of Oz album.
You're leaving out some good juicy details there, my
well,
friend.
I'll let you pick it up.
when Ozzy first came out and heard Randy Rhoads playing, he was pretty inebriated, and just heard him warming up. He was just warming up.
Okay.
And Ozzy was so blown away by this that he said that, "Am I fucking stoned, or am I hallucinating, or what the fuck is this?"
Yeah.
And immediately gave Randy Rhoads the job. And Randy Rhoads replied to him, "I just tuned up and did some riffs."
Yeah. Oh wow.
He told me, he said, "You didn't even hear me play yet, really."
Well, that's
and Ozzy hired him right on the site.
On the spot, and it's kind of interesting because at this point in time, I mean, before anybody ever hears a lick of the Blizzard of Oz album, everybody's kind of thinking, what is Ozzy going to do? What is an Ozzy Osbourne solo album going to... Is it going to sound like Black Sabbath? Is it going to be different? And like with a lot of people, I think...
He had a lot of skeptics out there. Yeah. He had a lot to prove with this record. It was a really crucial record, and it was a blessing for him running across Randy Rhoads at this time in his life, too, especially battling alcohol and stuff that he... in the shape and the state that he was in. Randy was a blessing to him at this time.
Yeah, and this
absolutely, in a number of different ways.
And this at this point in time, I don't think he's even married to Sharon yet. I mean, from what I understand,
no, this was when he was married to his first wife, Thelma.
Yeah, and see, he was managed by Sharon's father, and I think around this time is when she started helping her father manage Ozzy's career, and the interesting thing about it is, again, like you said, Ozzy, from what I've heard, he was almost at death's door. I mean, he was so strung out on alcohol. He was living in a hotel. I don't even know, but I've read stuff like this that he was living in a hotel. He was drinking every day. He was just an awful mess, kind of like what you were just saying. And he happens to come across this guy. And then the thing is, you'd also think, okay, Ozzy's got to get somebody that sounds kind of like Tony Iommi, because that's what he's known for. But they went kind of the totally opposite, different direction, which kind of makes sense to me, because if you got a Tony Iommi clone, that's exactly what they're gonna say. Oh, this guy's trying to be Tony Iommi, and he's not.
Right.
And it's amazing because like Blizzard of Oz too, with the album at the time, they named the album Blizzard of Oz because the band at the time they were going to call Blizzard of Oz, and I don't know how long they called the band that, but eventually it just became Ozzy Osbourne. And the first thing anybody ever heard off of that Blizzard of Oz album was Crazy Train. And I was even reading, some stuff today that when we think of Randy Rhoads, that's the first that's the first lick anybody ever heard, or that's the song that when you bring up the name Randy Rhoads, everybody points to that song.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, that was like the probably one of the biggest Billboard hits, or most popular songs that they did. Of course, every cover band for the next 45 years was playing Crazy Train.
Oh yeah,
and beyond. It's
and it's
a pretty big staple. But going back, I want to go back to when they flew Randy out the first time to England. There's an interesting story there too.
Okay.
He didn't have the proper paperwork, so he was actually spent the night in a holding cell, handcuffs.
Wow.
Before he could go back to the United States. Ozzy apologized, and they got all the proper paperwork together, and had to fly him back there to England. So he went through some shit there, just trying to work with Ozzy.
Yeah, and then I heard something to a similar effect that originally Dana Strum was supposed to be the bass player, something similar to that, where but he could not get over to England. He didn't have enough money, or he couldn't get the right paperwork, and so he was kind of out at that point. And then like you were saying with Frankie Banelli, he was, from what I understand, he was a candidate to fill the drum slot, but for one reason or another, he couldn't make it over to England either. So then they eventually end up with, I guess, Lee Kirksley as a drummer, who was the drummer from Uriah Heep. He recently passed not too long ago, but and then Bob Daisley ended up being the bass player, and then of course Randy Rhoads.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because I've worked with a number of different guitar players myself throughout the years, and the one common thing that I hear, when the discussion comes to, who's your influences and things like that, so many of the guitar players that I've worked with have said Randy Rhoads, that's one of their influences, absolutely,
Yeah. And then, in regards to Blizzard of Oz and then also Diary of a Madman, I got to ask you, Joe, what do you think? This has been a kind of a long-going controversy among Ozzy fans. As I'm sure you know, Bob Daisley and Lee Kirksley, the guys that played on these two Ozzy studio albums originally, they were kind of cheated out of their songwriting royalties, supposedly, and they've sued many times over the years trying to get what they felt was owed to them. So at one point, Ozzy and Sharon decided, okay, we're going to take these guys who originally played on this classic album off album. We're going to bring some new guys. I think they brought in Rob Trujillo, who's now in Metallica, and then Mike Borden, who's he's played with Ozzy over the years, and he used to be in Faith No More. They brought these two guys in to kind of record the bass tracks, re-recorded the bass tracks and the drum tracks, and then they kind of re-released these classic albums. First of all, what's your thoughts on doing something like that?
Well, I'm not going to point fingers
or
take sides with that because I wasn't there and I didn't see the contracts. So I don't know what was involved with all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like those guys got a rotten deal or a shady deal. And I did hear that Ozzy made the comment with Bob Daisley, multiple times, taking him to court or whatever. And Ozzy made the comment, it's only 4 bloody strings. How much money do I got to pay him? I mean, it's kind of harsh to hear him say that, but I don't know, like I said, to what extent they were involved and what their contracts were with Ozzy.
Not so much that.
You would have to be fair and to be honest. You would have to know those details to even develop an opinion.
Well, I guess what I'm asking, not so much that, but what do you think of you have these legal issues and you thought, and it is true that okay, simple way we can just handle this is we'll just bring in a different drummer and a different bass player to re-record the parts. But I guess what I'm asking, as a musician yourself, as maybe an Ozzy fan, what do you think of, not necessarily why they did it, but the fact that rather than, do you think it deludes the classic album, saying, we're just going to we'll put another drummer on top of what was originally there, another bass player? Do you think, it is what it is?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm removed from that situation because I wasn't the bass player that got removed.
Yeah.
I wasn't in that band. I wasn't part of that deal, so I don't have any feelings either way about it. I think it worked out for the fans in a good way because he later after that went on to get Tommy Aldridge on drums and Rudy Sarzo on bass, which was an incredible lineup. So, that was kind of a win-win for him really there,
Yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is and Ozzy's not the only one that's done this. I mean, other bands have done stuff like this, but I guess what I'm asking is, there is one school of thought, even forget about the legal issues and why they were suing him and all this, but okay, let's say Blizzard of Oz, it's a classic album, and, Randy's dead, and, in a way, having other guys come in and record their tracks over the original guys, do you think it takes away from the original recording, or that it kind of makes it any less special that you have different musicians coming in, kind of almost like, hey, this is a version that's out now. Forget about the original guys that played on it.
Well, there's a little bit of a gray area there, but also to me, if a guitar player or a musician writes a piece of music, then they should be the ones on that record.
Yeah.
Unless they agree, with someone, hey, this is my song, but you can use it on your record, and and they get paid for it, and that's fine too. There's musicians and songwriters out there that do nothing but that. They write music, and famous people buy it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know that, but that's a lot of the hits you hear have been written by people you've never heard of.
Oh, yeah. I mean...
So that's kind of a normal thing. But to me, if a guy's in your band and he wrote a piece of music, for you to go on and just say, oh, well, we'll get this guy to record it and that guy to record it and whatever, that's kind of, it's kind of shitty. It's kind of a shady gray area there.
Yeah.
And, unless, like I said, unless you have a mutual understanding that, hey, I'm going to, move on with these songs and that person's okay with it,
Yeah, I mean, this was done, I think, sometime in the early... 2000s, years after the original recordings came out, but you had a certain percentage of fans kind of saying, hey, that kind of stinks you're messing with the original recording, and I do think, like you're saying, it's a good lesson for people that's part of a reason this is the music business. I mean, I kind of laugh at like when Ozzy said whatever he said, you're saying about he just plays four strings, but Bob Daisy was brought in not just for his bass playing. I mean, he's another guy that if you look at the Ozzy the Ozzy solo albums, he was a co-writer on many of the biggest hits, even stuff like on No More Tears. He plays a lot of the bass on that. He wrote a lot of those songs on No More Tears, even though he was brought in as a studio musician even when he was out of the band, in and out over the years. And so that's part of the reason he worked with Bob Daisy, because he was a great songwriter. And a lot of the guys in Ozzy's band, like Jakey Lee, he makes similar. He didn't go to the point, I don't think, of suing Ozzy or anything. But he's got on record saying that he wrote a lot of these Ozzy songs he played on that he's been kind of cheated on supposedly, or he didn't get the credit he should have. And
right.
Again, it's I agree with you. It's kind of a music business, and if you're not smart enough to get a lawyer and look over the contract, okay, that's kind of your fault, and it is, the Ozzy Osbourne band. So, a lot of people even said over years, like, we were talking, the fact that, hey, Randy Rhoads even said something about that he had to kind of teach Ozzy kind of how to write a song. And if you know any of the guys that have been Ozzy's bands over here, they're all guys that, even the guitar players, not only are they great shredders, but they can write great songs. If you look at any of his albums, all the guys in the band are listed as co-writers. And so, but then again, it is Ozzy Osbourne band, so you got the probably common sense to know that even if he didn't write a lyric, even if he didn't write a single note of music, it's an Ozzy Osbourne album, so he's going to get something for it,
Absolutely, yeah. Going into a situation like that, the musicians, probably are told or probably know that if they write something or do something, that Ozzy's going to get to pick and choose if he wants to keep that song or that riff or whatever, I'm sure there's probably something in a contract that states something to that effect.
That's why, like, even
I would assume.
On his latest album, which is called Ordinary Man, it came out last year. I mean, he's last couple albums he's put out, he doesn't really have a solid band. He has different guys kind of come in. Like he had Slash and Duff play on the last album, and he hasn't really done much touring because of COVID and everything behind that. But on his last couple albums, I think that's why he does that now. He has different guys kind of in the touring band, and different people come and play on the album. So I think that's his way of getting around that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super respectful of Ozzy, and I'm glad he's still with us, and I'm glad he's put out all these albums and stuff. But you can't help but wonder, how much more could he have done, or could he have accomplished
without these other guys?
Without the alcoholism, without the drug addiction, without the struggles that he had, the roadblocks, if you will. How many more records? How many more tours? How many more shows that were canceled that could have happened? How much more could he have accomplished? Probably, it's unbelievable.
I will say this: I am glad that he kind of ended his career going back to Black Sabbath, but before they decided kind of call it a day, because the shows he was doing the last couple of years with Black Sabbath, I mean, he was much better shape than he was in those. When he left Black Sabbath in '79 or whenever it was, but so he got to that on a high note. And it's kind of interesting that I think part of the reason now maybe that Black Sabbath called it a day too is I think maybe very much like Glenn Tipton and Judas Priest, Ozzy's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I think maybe that probably had something to do with them finally kind of putting Black Sabbath to rest, because Ozzy's done this one more last solo album, and it was people were taking a liking to it and stuff. But I think this might be his last hurrah.
Right.
And getting back to Randy, it's kind of interesting. Like you said at the top of this, Joe. I was kind of paying notice that this year on March 19th marks the 39th anniversary, like I said, of his death. You sit there and you think about the fact that on that day, when he died, he was only 25 years old. I mean, he was just starting to live his life. Just his career was just in the beginning stages, and so at this point, the guy's been, unfortunately, sad to say, he's been dead much longer than he was ever alive. But when you stop and think of the legacy he left behind and what could have been.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I said, it's the face of guitar playing and music changed forever when that guy started recording albums. I mean, nobody had a sound like him. Nobody had a pristine, crisp, clean technique like he had.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just he was very unique. He was very creative, and he did things differently. A lot of times, a lot of rock and metal albums musically speaking, are wrote in A and E, and he drifted off into the minor keys and did things completely different that were not the norm. Weren't things you normally heard.
Yeah,
and that was part of Randy's sound as well.
And Diary of a Madman and Blizzard of Oz. I mean, two classic albums. They're both about 40 years old at this point, and it's kind of interesting too because both these albums stand out really on their own. I mean, and interesting is you can almost hear the progression from Blizzard of Oz to Diary of a Madman. I mean, they could have gone in there and said, okay, we're going to make Blizzard of Oz too, but it was kind of, like I said, a progression. It wasn't that.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting to think because I've heard a lot of people say, even though his career was taken off with Ozzy at that point, that he was already starting to tell kind of some of his friends and people that he was working with behind the scenes that he didn't want to be with Ozzy forever. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he thought maybe he wanted to go back and get like a degree in music, and he wanted to go and start recording like classical music type of stuff and put out classical music guitar albums, and it's kind of interesting because we don't know if he would have done that or not, and if he would, it would have been interesting to see how his fans would have reacted to that,
Yeah. Once on a sad note, or somber note, I guess one of the last things that Ozzy recalls Randy saying to him the night that he died was, "You'll kill yourself one of these days."
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty profound, pretty
interesting,
kind of chilling.
Yeah. And then, of course, we can't end this without getting into a little bit about talking about his death, because the way he died was so tragic. I mean, he's not the first musician to die in a plane crash, but that plane crash he was in was so horrific. I mean, from what I was reading today, it crashed somewhere in Florida. The band was on tour at the time, and I forget why they were up the plane, but it was kind of like the situation with Cliff Burton, in that horrible Metallica bus accident, where it was between Randy and somebody else going on the plane, and him and this other young girl, which I think was Sharon Osbourne's best friend. I've heard her talk about this over the years, and they kind of decided, okay, we'll go on the plane. I think it had something to do, there wasn't enough room for everybody on the tour bus, and they offered to go on the plane. And I mean, this happened so close to where the band and everybody was. I guess it was around where the tour bus was parked, and I mean, they were that close to see the crash happen. And everybody in the band, which at that point, like you said, once they hit the road, they had Tommy Aldridge in the band and Rudy Sarzo at this point, and everybody on the tour bus, they were looking at the sky, I guess, at the plane it was a little plane taking off, and I think it just had the pilot and this friend of Sharon's and Randy in the plane, and they were watching the plane take off, and it crashed immediately, and it was major news that day. I mean, I was very young at the time when this took place, but I've since heard news reports, people talking about about the plane crash and stuff, and it's just such a horrific event. And I've even heard Rudy Sarzo wrote a book about it, about how close him and Randy were, and about how his death affected him, and so it's just, I mean, it's one of those things, almost kind of like the Leonard Skinner plane crash, where I mean, if you were around when the plane crashed, you just never, it affected you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's very sad. Very sad.
Yeah, and then again, I feel the need to also point that at that point in time again, Randy has just died. Ozzy's lost his super duper guitar hero, the guy that kind of helped put him on the map as a solo artist, and at that point they really didn't know what they were going to do. And I mean they knew enough. Okay, we're going to have to replace the guy, but at that point they weren't even thinking about that. And I don't really know how long it was before the band went back on the road, but at that point they got this guy Bernie Torme who at that point played with and Ian Gillan, the singer from Deep Purple, played in his solo band, and he just played with Ozzy's band for a little bit. Eventually they got Jakey Lee, of course.
Yeah, which in my opinion, that was pretty tough. No matter who walked into that spot on guitar next after Randy Rhoads, boy, what shoes to fill.
Well, actually,
wowee,
Yeah, and actually, I think before Jakey Lee came in, they got Brad Gillis too. He went on the road with the band.
From Night Ranger.
From Night Ranger, and I think it's out of print, but there was a live Ozzy EP called "Speak of the Devil." I think Brad Gillis plays on that. So if anybody's got that, that's kind of from that period, and that's kind of a collector's item.
I got it.
But pretty cool. And again, Ozzy was he even when he got these other guys in the band, he really didn't know what he was going to do. And
right.
And it's kind of interesting because Brad Gillis, I guess maybe because he was known at the time from Night Ranger, he didn't receive anywhere near the backlash that like Jakey Lee did. Jakey Lee's talked for years, and I've seen things on the internet, photos of people like yelling, or just saying stuff like "fuck you, Jake," Randy rules. And could you imagine being Jakey Lee and following that for the whole time you were in Ozzy's band, like "fuck you, man, Randy rules"? I mean, wow. It's not
right.
It's not his fault that the guy got killed, but wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I want to thank you, Joe, for kind of helping me look back on kind of the career that was Randy Rhoads, and it's kind of interesting because he died so young, and so everybody's kind of got that. You'll never lose that image of this young kid. Anytime you see a photo of him, he just looks so young, and that's forever image you have of this guy because he was just so tragically young, and he'd already established. Randy Rhoads goes way beyond just. Can't even say the potential the guy had. He had already shown the potential he had. He was on his way.
Right, absolutely.
And I just, I don't know really what else to say. Now, before we end this, Joe, of those two albums, do you have a favorite as far as Blizzard of Oz versus Diary of a Madman?
You know what? No, I don't. They're both at the same level.
Yeah.
Because they're both iconic and classic, and I like both of them. Every song on both records. There's, not all of them are blazing fast and whatnot, but they're all such classic pieces of music and so important that both great records, absolutely.
Yeah, and
I couldn't pick one.
Yeah, and I will say this: I think what kind of for me sets Diary of a Madman kind of apart from Blizzard is you can hear the progression, and like you said. Maybe on Blizzard of Oz, it's more of a kind of a harder, heavier edge to the record, a little more heavier. Whereas on Diary of a Madman, you got a little more different styles on the album.
Right.
Yeah, and bringing up Ozzy Osbourne before we wrap this up, they recently put out a great box set of. They re-released Volume 4. I don't know if you've seen this online or anything, Joe, but. I picked it up, and it was like I got it off of Amazon, and it cost like $59. Something that's a little hefty, but I will say this: it was well worth the price because first, I'll tell you what I love about the whole package is the box, just the packaging. It comes in this nice huge box. You get four CDs with it, and okay, the first CD one you get like the original album remastered. It's kind of repackaged. Then they also throw in a poster. They throw in a nice little book to kind of just talk about Black Sabbath from that time period and the album. And then disc 2 and 3, you get kind of some studio outtakes, rarities, tracks that never been released from when they were recording the album. And then the final CD 4 is like it's a concert from that tour. So again, the price is a little hefty, but I just dig the packaging, stuff like that, and it's all remastered. Pretty cool. So my question is regarding that. How big of a Black Sabbath fan were you, Joe? And does Volume 4 or any of those early Black Sabbath albums mean anything to you?
Oh, of course they do. I mean, Black Sabbath was a huge staple for me. But honestly, I liked Sabbath with Dio a little bit better. I liked what Ozzy did with him. It wasn't that I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I just think I was more drawn to what Dio did with him.
Yeah, I'm with you. And
I like solo Ozzy better. Yeah. I really did.
That's interesting. I'm kind of with you there. I mean, I don't know if it's just Ronnie's voice and his songwriting, but I mean, very much like we were saying, when Ozzy released Blizzard of Oz, everybody was waiting to see what Ozzy was going to do. And this was a very interesting time in rock history. 1980 we're talking about, when Blizzard of Oz first came out. Everybody's waiting to see, what's Ozzy going to do? What's Sabbath going to do? Who's going to take Ozzy's place? And you had these two bands kind of competing against one another, and you're waiting to see who's going to outdo the other. And honestly, they both put out equally great records, And
absolutely.
I was happy to kind of see both bands kind of at that time go on to have continued success. Now, I would like in a future episode maybe to talk about Black Sabbath a little more, and maybe specifically this Volume 4 I got, because what's interesting, I love a lot of, if you go back and you listen kind of at like the first 3 Sabbath albums, it is really a different sound. It really is kind of like, I don't know, just dark. And what I was reading in the book about Volume 4 is they were talking about, okay, if you listen to the very first Black Sabbath album, okay, he goes, the band was created in Birmingham, England. We grew up in Birmingham, England. We built that, we recorded that first studio album in like 11 or 12 days. It was a much better, by the time we got to Volume 4, it was a much different scene. We were like, we'd broken out in the big time by then. When Volume 4 is recorded, we're living in a mansion that we're renting in, Southern California. We're living the good life. We're able to get the good drugs and stuff. And if you listen, like, compared to, let's say, Volume 4 to the first Sabbath album, sounds very different. And I guess based on how you're living the good life or not, that has very huge effect on the way the band's going to sound.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Something interesting to note here to end things off with a Randy Rhoads tribute is in 2019, Ozzy offered $25,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of some stuff that was stolen from Randy Rhoads' mother's music school.
Oh, wow.
So some iconic pieces of gear and stuff were stolen. I don't know if you knew that or...
Oh, no, and while you bring that up, it popped another thing in my mind before we wrap this up. And I don't know why anybody would do this. I guess kind of just want to get close to the guy's grave and that. But a couple years ago, some fans went and they kind of damaged the grave site. And again, I don't know why you would do that. So I just say, kind of let somebody rest in peace. But the other thing that kind of just popped in my mind, this last thing I kind of want to bring up, that I feel is kind of very important. The guitar, especially when you're talking about a guitar legend like Randy Rhoads, the guitar he plays is a major factor, and that guitar that Randy Rhoads polka dot Jackson Flying V guitar, that's what that guy was known for playing. I mean, and again, it's hard to almost think of Randy Rhoads and not think of those polka dots that were all over on his guitar. But again, not even knowing he was making that impression with his guitar, I mean, that's one of the things we think of,
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Jackson went on to make a variety of those Randy Rhoads Flying V guitars, and they sold like crazy. I mean, again, that's a testament to the legacy that he left behind.
Yeah.
But going back to my statement, real quick, with the 2019 people stealing stuff from Mrs. Rhoads' music school. I just found out tonight, actually. I never knew that this stuff was recovered.
Oh, wow.
They found the stuff later, a few days later, in a dumpster. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Somebody would break in here, steal all kinds of iconic pieces of gear, PV amp head, and all kinds of stuff that was personal stuff that was Randy Rhoads, just maliciously like that, and then throw it in a fucking dumpster.
Wow.
What the hell is wrong with people?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I mean, why would you not? If you're going to do that, just take it back, or at least leave it on the
They probably
studio.
got scared. They probably got scared and realized that maybe they didn't realize what it was or whose stuff they were taking.
Yeah.
They just thought it was some music store gear that they were stealing, and then found out and read about it, seen it in the headlines, and said, "Oh shit!" Got scared and unloaded it in a dumpster somewhere.
Oh yeah, and speaking of a school, see, even years after Randy, died, I mean, people that were just into Randy Rhoads or learning anything about him, people would go take trips to that music school just to kind of check it out. I think part of it is a museum now, and people, I don't know if you can still go, but for several years the school remained successful because people were just going to check it out because that was Randy Rhoads' studio where he grew up in.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of interesting, like we were reading earlier, Randy came from a musical family, and he had a brother, his older brother Kelly, who he's done a few things here and there. He's put out a couple albums. He's tried, I guess, have a career, but for whatever reason, he never broke out the big way his little brother did. And the stuff I was reading on the Wikipedia, at one point, like you're saying, they formed a cover band, and his older brother was a drummer in the band. He was like Randy. He was classically trained. He could play more than just one instrument. So I guess they need a drummer. He played the drums in that. But it's kind of an interesting thing to see that. I don't know why Randy and his brother wouldn't have formed a band or done something together. Maybe because they were years apart, age-wise. I don't know. But it's kind of interesting. One brother has a huge success. The other one, never quite had the same spark.
Right. Yeah. Well, there for a short time, he did play in a band with his brother, Violet Fox.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Like,
it was a real short-lived experience.
And he was the drummer. He was the drummer in that.
Together, yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. And before we wrap this up, finally, Joe, what I wanted to ask you about, not regarding Randy Rhoads, but I'd seen a post you made on Facebook a couple days ago, and I seen the artwork from the new Scream Kings album, so that's pretty exciting. That's getting closer and closer.
Yeah, absolutely. We're working on getting some things finalized and running it through to get the disc manufactured. I was hoping to secure a good deal for us to be able to release it on vinyl, and maybe that will come later in the future. Yeah. But for now, it'll probably just be CD and digital, and we're excited to get that out, and we're going to try and get these videos done here within the next couple of months. We'll be unleashing all of that, so stay tuned soon. And
can you share with us in regards to the artwork you displayed, who designed that?
Yeah, a good friend of mine. His name is Drake Mafesta. You can look him up, Drake Mafesta Designs. Yeah. He's done work for Symphony X and Cradle of Filth and all kinds of great big bands, and he's a phenomenal, very passionate artist. He did the Tyranny of the Sea record for us.
Oh, wow.
And he did some amazing artwork on this. The artwork on this is the most elaborate, cool, in-depth artwork of any music project I've been involved with.
Yeah, it really stood out to me,
we really asked him to go full bore with it, and he did a fantastic job. So the artwork is really amazing. Wait till you see it all.
Yeah, and I want to, this is going to be my final word for the night, which is this. I really urge people, Joe, when you and me post anything regarding This Is Metal, to kind of comment if they like. That's always a cool thing to do. And what kind of accidentally happened, which I wasn't even planning, is when we posted our most recent episode up, which is, of course, the Sean Peck episode. You had made a comment regarding that you had you've covered like some Black Sabbath stuff over the years, and this other guy made a similar comment that his band that he was in at the time had actually toured with Sean Peck, and he covered like a Black Sabbath tune and something about that you guys were on the same tribute album. Anyways, I contacted this guy, and he's agreed that just because I was able to kind of see this guy's comment and find out that he was kind of in a band that had a little bit of success, he's agreed to kind of do a bonus interview with me for This Is Metal, kind of talking about his Sean Peck connection. So it's kind of interesting to find out who's out there in our audience that this guy at one point, he had a little bit of success, a little bit of a music career, and he actually has some stories to tell about Sean Peck. So because he commented on that, we're going to do an interview with him, and like I said, who knows who's out there?
Yeah, that's Jay Davis. He's a friend of mine. I know him. Great guy, great singer, and he's a great guy, and it'll be a fun interview, man. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that to me is he was sharing with me that he's kind of been out of the music business for like the last 20 years. He's got to like a lot of people. He's got a day job, got to support his family and that's what he's doing. But he's like, I'm like, wow, 20 years ago, you were doing that. But I can't wait to hear what he has to say. And the other thing I've been listening to is this new Joel Hoekstra album. It's called Joel Hoekstra's 13, and he's one of the guitar players in Whitesnake. And I tell you, it's his second album he's putting out. I urge people to give it a listen because it's not just it really isn't a guitar shredder type of album. It's great guitar playing, but he's a great songwriter. So what he was saying he wants to do with this is he wrote all these songs with it's got vocals, and the guy doing the vocals is Russell Allen, from Adrenaline Mob, and he's got Vinny Appice playing the drums and Tony Franklin doing the bass. So it's a real strong album, one of the best things come out this year. So anything you have to say, Joe, before we wrap it up?
No, that's it, man. Long live Randy Rhoads' memory and all of his music. We're thankful for the little bit of music that we got from him. It would have been nice to get more, but...
and that's the other interesting thing.
Quite a legacy for just a few records.
That's the other thing, because he died in 1982. I'm kind of amazed to find out that you kind of wonder why, we haven't unearthed all these unreleased videotapes and stuff. And I guess videotape and stuff was very early on at that time in 1982, and he died. So, I've heard Ozzy and Sharon talk about. There's not a truckload of unreleased Ozzy footage with Randy, and which is kind of sad too.
Yeah, it is. Well, there's a little bit of stuff, but not a lot. Yep.
Yeah. Hey Joe, if you could hold on.